Oh, it does. And you've experienced that, as you said yourself. You've been met with violence just for taking an American flag to a protest. You didn't even say anything, do anything. Just the presence of the American flag was enough to trigger these people into violent acts against you.
Of an American flag?
Yeah.
I didn't fly a MAGA sign, right? Or some pro-Israel sign. It was an American flag in America, having Americans react to it. It's so fascinating how the left has devolved into violence. And look, they say there's this narrative that it's white supremacists who are involved. And yes, look, there's some truth to that, obviously. But with all large lies, they take a kernel of truth and they distort it, right?
Yeah.
Look at it's doing here. Sure, there is violence on the very hard far right, but it's such a small percentage of the demographic makeup of the right as opposed to the violence of the left. It's a much larger percentage of the Democratic population.
And we see case after case after case, and you've seen some polling recently that bears that out, where people who identify as left-leaning or very left are quite openly saying, yes, acts of violence are justifiable in some cases.
What's so fascinating about that poll is that it's a linear poll, right? The spectrum is very clear. The more left you are, the more prone to violence, which we kind of knew.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating was the more right you are, the less you are calling for violence, and that people in the center actually call for more violence or accept more violence in our political culture than people in the center right does. Yeah, it's a fascinating poll.
And completely contrary to so much of the media commentary on this issue, because they love running that line that the biggest threat is right-wing extremism, when that's just not the case. Now, we saw footage today of Charlie Kirk's final moments, his final day, and I was really touched by that. I wasn't expecting to see it. We saw a little bit of this about a week ago, but we saw a lot more today, and he was just so full of life, so full of joy. He was on a university campus, massive crowd, beautiful day, and the horror that followed is just unthinkable. Let's have a look at some of that footage.
All right, 3, 2, 1, smile. Awesome, guys. Thank you.
Charlie Kirk! Charlie Kirk! Charlie Kirk! Charlie Kirk! Charlie Kirk! USA! 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 USA!
That was Utah Valley University, and you see Charlie there with a big smile on his face. He was always smiling. He was the joyful warrior. They killed the joyful warrior.
I mean, I want to rewire my brain for that to be the image I remember of Charlie Kirk, as opposed to having seen those horrific images where I was just woken up. I was in a different part of the world, and I wake up to texts from friends and family telling me that he was killed. And I turn on, Instagram, and I couldn't believe it. The images of him being murdered were all over the place and just seared into my memory. And those are the images I want to remember him, the happy warrior, the person who was open and friendly, which is so crazy because they're trying to make him the exact opposite. They keep using the word hateful and hate. And you saw not just those images, but when he spoke, and if you listen, I have been listening to hours of what he was saying in those debates. And you don't hear any hate from him. It's openness. It's wanting to convince somebody else of his position. That's not hateful. It's the opposite of hateful.
And the fact that, again, commentators, some people in the media who should know better, Democrats, congresswomen, are using the sort of language that the alleged killer used. It's almost exactly the same. Even this horrific murder, this assassination, hasn't been enough to wake them up that this isn't the way to go. This is not the way to engage in political debate.
Yeah, but unfortunately, a lot on the left think it is.
Yeah.
Right? Because, remember, words are violence. So if words are violence, then you can use violence to combat words because they're the same thing on a moral level. I guess they didn't have their parents tell them, use your words.
Yeah.
Because they use their violence.
That's it. Now, I mentioned earlier that Ilhan Omar posted something terrible about Charlie Kirk, casting him as some sort of a Frankenstein who created a monster who killed him. I mean, that in itself is just so it's not just ugly, it's full of lies. It was someone from the left that killed him. It wasn't some Turning Point USA devotee. And she's doubling down, Ami. There is absolutely no self-reflection, no apology, no I'm going to turn down the temperature and do better. She's doubled down on it on CNN without shame.
I'm sorry, are you surprised? Of course not.
I'm still surprised because she can see this outpouring of grief, she can see the reaction. I'm sure it's taken someone like her who exists in an echo chamber by surprise, but to not take even a moment to reconsider her position.
Shame and remorse are not words or actions in the vocabulary of the left. And actually, on that CNN interview, I want to point something out that people haven't pointed out, is that as horrific as that was, and it was obviously, but she had said to the CNN host, she said, well, do you agree that that I have less brain processing power as a black woman? But the problem was that the host said, of course I don't agree. But the host didn't say, because we know that was debunked. The host knows that. The host didn't say, oh, I'm sorry. But he never said that.
Yeah.
She kind of implied that he did say that, and she didn't agree with him, which is the entire problem, casting him as this evil person when it wasn't his words.
Do you think Caitlin Collins is ignorant? She didn't know that? Or she chose not to make that correction because we know where her politics lies, and she doesn't want to be sticking up for a Charlie Kirk and being critical of an Ilhan Omar?
Well, then she's either the worst journalist in the world and didn't hear all the debunking that went on, or she did, and she chose to ignore it because she likes to cast people like us, people like me, I should say, and Charlie Kirk as evil.
Now, Vice President J.D. Vance gave a superb speech, and he had this poignant line.
It is better to die a young man in this world than to sell your soul for an easy life with no purpose, no risk, no love, and no truth.
I mean, what do you make of the role faith played in today's memorial? Just about, in fact, every speaker talked about faith, and it was so important to Charlie. His Christian faith was the most important thing to him, and his values, the way he lived his life, what he preached, was centered around that.
I mean, faith is an important part of what makes us more human, right? What brings the humanity out of us. And when we look at Charlie Kirk and say he was this happy warrior, well, that goes hand in hand with his faith, because that's what his faith taught him.
Yeah.
And I think that, and again, when we go back to contrasting the rallies of the left, these are rallies devoid of faith. And when you don't have faith, when you don't have a belief in God, that's when you devolve into violence, I think. And I think that that's why we see what happened today in Arizona, in Glendale, Arizona, was such a loving, warm embrace of life, as opposed to a demonization. I think it's because of the faith.
And yet, at a funeral, we had the sort of security you might expect if you're entering the Oval Office. It took hours for everyone to go through. No one was really complaining. You had the president there, the vice president, just about every senior member of the administration, so you can understand. But the fact that you can't even have any sense of security at a funeral speaks to just what a crisis point there is in this country when it comes to political debate. There is nothing that's off limits.
Those days are over. Those days of being able to walk on a college campus, give a speech in an open area are over. Look, I get death threats all the time. Everyone I know who is in this world gets death threats repeatedly. Ben Shapiro can't give a speech on a campus without having a phalanx of security guards and police officers, not to mention his own personal security.
Yeah.
And I think what we learned is that, look, if somebody wants to kill you, right, they're going to be able to do it. If they're willing to trade, they may not have to die, but they're willing to trade their freedom, they can do it. It's a scary time for people who want to speak out, but we have to. We have no choice.
I think it's something Douglas Murray said: when something like this happens, you spread the risk. I think he was actually quoting Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who's intimately aware of the horrors that can come from extremists attacking you for your opinion. Now, the New York Post has a great editorial on the funeral. They called it a message to the mainstream media. The editorial asks, was Jimmy Kimmel watching Sunday? Was ABC? Do they understand the bubble they've created? Not only do they not speak to or for these people, they deny they exist. It is unsustainable. I mean, what's your reaction to that? Because you can tell there are many in the media who are shocked by this outpouring of grief, the fact that people have travelled from around the country to be here. They were lining up overnight by 4 a.m. in the dark. There seemed like tens of thousands waiting to enter the stadium. The crowd was huge. And so many in the media are completely blindsided by that.
Yeah, because, look, you know, it's so interesting. The outrage we saw to Jimmy Kimmel's firing as compared to the outrage of an assassination of a cultural and political figure. It's incredible to me. This is what the left has done. It doesn't matter. They're more outraged about a hack comedian who had no audience, right, than truly a significant turning point in our culture. An assassination of a political figure did not draw as much ire from the left as a firing of Jimmy Kimmel.
And they didn't mention it at the Emmys, did they? Not even a passing reference to this significant event.
Do you think that was possible?
I mean,
really?
You would think, when I started seeing major sporting leagues having a moment's silence, doing some of them fairly lengthy tributes, I thought maybe the culture has shifted and that would be reflected in Hollywood. But no, Hollywood is running
not only
its
that,
own show.
Hollywood demonized people in Hollywood who said anything nice about Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
Not that they supported Charlie Kirk, God forbid, but people who said, like, a killing of Charlie Kirk is a terrible thing, like Kristen Chenoweth.
Yeah.
And she got roasted by Hollywood for showing empathy.
It's a sick, sick place. Now, the left, the Democrats, are suddenly passionate about free speech, or what they think is free speech. Jimmy Kimmel's terrible program, low-rating program, has been pulled off air. And, Ami, it's incredible. They're trying to make Jimmy Kimmel the victim of this entire catastrophe. Somehow, he's the victim. He's the one who's being targeted and persecuted, as opposed to the man who's had his life taken from him. And he was persecuted with the Biden DOJ. They were investigating Turning Point, him personally. He spoke about his fear of ending up in federal prison if a Democrat was elected president again.
Look, I'm not a fan of the government getting involved in something like Jimmy Kimmel. I don't think it's a good idea. I think it sets a bad precedent, and I promise you it will boomerang when there's a Democratic president.
But it already has. This is the point that Republicans make. Those sort of arguments ring a little hollow because the Democrats go out of their way to silence
They always have.
their political opponents. So I don't know. I think perhaps if they get a taste of their own medicine, if they're held to their own standards,
I don't like it from
maybe
either
they'll
side.
back away from this sort of cancel culture. No.
No, I don't like it from either side. I don't think it's healthy.
Well,
Having
I mean,
said
the
that,
man he's lost 70% of his
no,
audience.
he should have been. Don't get me wrong. He should have been
years
fired.
ago.
I have no problem with being firing. I just don't like any government intervention.
Well, of course, we don't want government intervention, but again, from what we've seen reported, he not only said something that was verifiably a lie, and he knew was a lie, he still said it. He had no intention of backing away. Like Ilhan Omar, he wanted to go back on the next program and double down on those attacks. And in that scenario, I mean, what could ABC do? They've just had a massive payout. Unless they're just happy writing checks endlessly, they had to take some action.
We're in the media business. We know they're not willing to write. They're not happy to write endless checks. Look, they were looking for an excuse. There's no question about it. I mean, you saw what happened to Colbert.
Yeah.
It was the same. Late night just isn't driving revenue. Their costs are out of control. Jimmy Kimmel makes a huge amount of money. Relative to the amount of audience they bring in, it's not worth it. They were looking for a reason, and he gave it to them.
Maths ain't mathsing, as the kids say. It makes no sense. Is that what they say?
They do say that.
Something like that. How can he earn that salary with that pitiful audience? I mean, what sort of a business are ABC running? If I was a shareholder, I'd be asking a few questions. I can tell you about that. Ami Horowitz, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming in today.
Always a pleasure.